this is Liz Mumford recording a quick intro for episode 2 of Kindred Sessions. As we mentioned in the first episode, we have different themes that will be rotating in throughout this podcast. Some will be Q&R, some about current events, some about social issues, some that are just food for thought, and some that pull in Bible teachers to discuss a specific passage. Episode 2 is within the theme of Bible literature, so if you are someone listening in that doesn't consider themselves to be a Christian or has a different belief about the Bible and God than the pastors on this episode represent, we wanted to let you know that this is just one piece of the conversation we are having throughout the podcast as a whole. Don't feel like you have to listen to this as a person who believes the same, but maybe take this as an opportunity to be a part of a conversation about Bible literature in historical context. We would love your thoughts and your perspective, as it will only add to the richness of this conversation. So feel free to email comments or questions to kindredsessionspodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget, you can also sign up for our newsletter and read our blogs at revdocsblog.com. If you would like to sponsor the making of this podcast, you can also email kindredsessionspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and now let's get started with episode 2 with Brandon Evans.
Welcome to the Kindred Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Mike Mumford. Excited for our second episode here, sitting here with Brandon Evans, good friend of mine and fellow pastor at Reno Christian Fellowship in South Reno in Nevada. And today we're going to be talking about Philippians, the book of Philippians in the Christian Bible, where we're going to be exploring just Jesus' humility and how that should impact Christians and how that affects our world and how that is something that will serve our world for the better if we can embrace the humility that God has within himself. So we're excited for this conversation. We hope you enjoy it and enjoy the show. All right, episode 2. Here we go. Starting. So yeah, this is our second episode, right? We're excited. We just started this podcast in order to talk about things that are common between us, that it goes for people within the Christian faith, people without, talking about subjects that are going to hopefully unite humans, but not necessarily make the culture homogenous, right? So unity without homogeneity is something that we've been talking about a lot, and something where we find just kind of partnership within one another and trying to seek the goodness of people and kind of where the cross-section of that happens. So today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about something from the Christian Bible out of the book of Philippians. The reason being that we're pastors. You can look into this camera if you want to. They're looking at you right there. We're pastors, and so we believe that the Christian Bible actually contains information and power to encourage the best human flourishing possible on this planet, the most personal development, the most fulfilled life, that is all contained within the pages of this book, which is, that's a big claim to make. But when you look out through history and how the Bible's been handled, when it's handled well, it is some of the most light years of leaps in social justice and equity. And when it's handled poorly, it's some of the most tragic stuff that's happened in history. So got to handle it well and handle it with care. But today we're going to jump into Philippians. What chapter? Chapter 2?
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. And we're going to be talking about the humility of Jesus and how that should impact us. So Brandon, why don't you just start before we jump into the text? Tell us a little bit about yourself, what makes you qualified to have this conversation?
I don't know what qualifies me other than I am a student of the Bible. I'm a teaching pastor here at Reno Christian Fellowship, so preach. That is my main ministry. And then I am currently a doctor of ministry student with Scott McKnight at Northern Seminary. Mm-hmm. So I've been focusing a lot on apocalyptic literature, but my project being an actual modern apocalypse, a novel written in the spirit of an ancient apocalypse to show how the genre worked, what its effect was meant to be. That's been a lot of my work, but through this, it's involved a whole Bible pursuit through formal education, informal education. This is my hobby, my profession, my devotion, all of that wrapped into one. So
does your novel happen to feature Bruce Willis drilling into the center of an asteroid to save the human race by blowing it up with a nuke?
No, I feel like that's been done before. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like it'd be a good box office hit if you were to do that one.
Right.
Okay.
But part of the apocalyptic genre is that they are filled with so much Bible. It's intertextual in the sense that it's hyperlinking back to basically the whole Hebrew scriptures and then the New Testament, depending on when the apocalypse was written. Revelation being the capstone example, where there's upwards of 1,000 allusions to the Bible in that book alone, although it never directly quotes the Old Testament.
Wow.
So it's like John the Revelator in writing Revelation is so saturated with the Bible, that's just how he thought.
Right.
He was a student of the Word in such a way that what he produced was filled with Bible.
Right.
And he gives somewhat of the model for what it means as a Christian to be filled with the Word of God, to be shaped by the Word of God, where it just comes out in how you talk, how you live, how you write, everything like that.
So you're talking, and just for our listeners, you're talking about apocalyptic literature, not necessarily being about the end of the world, like, the apocalypse, like we're talking about. We're talking about like that this is kind of pulling back the curtain of what's really there, right?
Definitely, yeah. Apocalypsis, it means unveiling, a revealing, not in our modern English term, the end of the world. Usually in an apocalyptic landscape in a modern movie or something, it would be some sort of cataclysmic event of which the world is destroyed and people are trying to live in that. Apocalypse is almost flipped that, where the world as we know it has stuff going on behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
The apocalypse reveals what's going on behind the scenes, and then Revelation in particular talks about the age to come as this recreation of the way the world was meant to be. Apocalypses end on a positive note.
Yeah. So not skyscraper tall tidal waves taking out Manhattan, right?
Right. Although some of the imagery and stuff is of destruction, but it is judgment on human sin because of human activity. It's not so much God raining down fireballs as it is humans destroying themselves because they're not living according to his instruction.
Right.
They are not living the lives that he has called us to live, how he has created us.
Mm-hmm.
But through Jesus, the unveiling of what's really going on, there's a call to faithfulness, and through that then a reshaping of how we live today in light of tomorrow.
Gotcha. Crazy stuff. I love the Book of Revelation. Book of Revelations, as I hear it very often.
Yeah.
But I love the Book of Revelation, man. It's just like, it was scary when I first read it, when I was young and like you had just started reading the Bible, didn't understand. And my youth group, like Bible study leader was like actively trying to convince me that this was about like America and Russia and China and World War III and the one world currency and microchips in your hand and in your head and all this kind of stuff. And I know that there's probably a lot of people that look at that book in that light. But yeah, I think it was Bible Project or something like that was talking about apocalyptic literature that kind of blew my mind about that. And Sam Storms, you ever heard of Sam Storms?
Mm-hmm.
He's a great scholar when it comes to Revelation and other apocalyptic literature as well.
Yeah, so that's my project in a nutshell, is to basically show in modern ways how that genre worked.
That's cool.
And the literary effect of it, and then I test it.
So that's the novel that you're writing.
That's the novel. Yeah, I've written it. Now I have to test it on people, give it to them, have them read it, and see what impact it had on them. And then that's my thesis in a nutshell.
If I could be a guinea pig for you, I would very much appreciate that.
I will hold you to that. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. I just signed myself up for a project. Cool. So, so where is it that you're studying?
Northern Seminary.
Northern
it's
Seminary.
In the Chicago suburbs. Yeah, Scott McKnight is there. Nijay Gupta is the new prof there.
Okay.
So it's a really fascinating school because it's old, but is now on the cutting edge technologically, but also in terms of ecumenical ministry. It is interdenominational.
Mm-hmm.
You have people from a variety of traditions, anywhere from Anabaptist, Anglican to other, and my cohort of doctoral students, there's 11 of us. None of us come from the same tradition.
Yeah.
We are so vastly different, and it's international. We have a Rwandan priest. We have a Canadian. That maybe doesn't count, but we're still like, we're in 3 countries. Yeah. And the rest of us are scattered throughout the United States. We have different traditions. So really what's unifying there is this pursuit of the Bible being the Bible, letting God speak through the Bible and how that forms us in our various contexts.
That's cool.
And this passage in Philippians we're going to look at is somewhat of an encapsulation of what the whole Bible is doing, this unfolding narrative of King Jesus. It is this tightly coiled, packaged narrative of Jesus' kingship in the span of however many verses. I'm not a math major, but from Philippians 2:5 through 11 is a call for us to think like Jesus. Then a poem, a hymn that was probably sung in the early Christian church that gives this story, this master story, as Michael Gorman calls it, where Paul is giving in a nutshell what Jesus came to do, how he expresses his divinity in his humanity, and what that says to us in terms of how God works through us, in us, and in our world. So,
right. But I like to just say, as we get these podcasts started, I said this in the last episode as well, and I'll say it probably in every episode moving forward, I am not an expert. I am not here to make an authoritative claim on anything about what we're talking about, whether it's Bible stuff or current events or anything that is currently at the topic, but I want to explore these things in a conversation and have a robust dialogue about them so that it can challenge things that I currently already think and things that we as the listeners need to be thinking through, critically. So, however, I will say Brandon kind of is an expert at some of this stuff. So I'm here to interview the expert and kind of get some of the best information out of this person as I possibly can.
Well, I would like to give that disclaimer too. I think the more I've studied the Bible, the less certain I have become about certain, in terms of my capacity to fully comprehend it. I've become less certain of that. In my younger days, and I'm not that old, I'm 37, I became a Christian at 23, but it was a short amount of time where I was like, I understand this. And then the more I have studied the Bible, the less I have been confident in my abilities to grasp it all. But the more confidence I have in its authority, its inspiration, its effectiveness in life. And so that pursuit of being a student of the Bible is something that's like, it's just not going to end. I can't be satisfied with what I even know now or what I understand now. And the whole point of the Bible as meditation literature, as something that actually God uses as a means to transform us. It's like we are meant to be in it constantly. We're meant to chew on it, wrestle with it. We're meant to explore it. And it's like, as you get more into studying the Bible, you realize there's so much more that you can study. And even this passage, I'm like, I might make some claims as this is, and years from now I may look and go, well, it's not that simple, without necessarily saying I was wrong, but just like I understood that at such a basic level.
Right.
And maybe 20 years from now, I could understand this passage in a much deeper way, definitely the story that this passage tells in a much deeper way, and look back on this podcast episode and be like, oh man, what was I even doing in there? Like, what was I talking about?
It's like the Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you heard that before?
No.
It's like when you start to gain an understanding of stuff, you feel like you're an expert in the field, and then the more understanding you get, the less you realize you actually know.
Yeah.
So that's good. I feel like it's a good sign. I feel like when we're discussing something as complicated and complex as the Christian Bible, that being able to kind of approach it with humility and knowing like this is not something that you can actually be like all the way knowledgeable about. This is something that's been poured over for thousands of years, thousands and thousands of years at this point. And still is like new things are being discovered but anyway, I think it's just important to
we're entering into a conversation that's been had over millennia, and we are but
and still
tiny,
unresolved
insignificant voices in that conversation. But God speaks through the ages through the Bible, and this passage being kind of like a capstone or a very focused version of that.
Right. Well, why don't you read Philippians 2:5 through 11 for us, and then we'll just kind of jump into it.
Sounds good. I'm reading out of the NIV. Okay. So, Paul says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. Basically, with one another, do as Jesus did. Think the same way he thought. Then he breaks into this song. And so it's very poetic in the original language, but I'll read it out of the NIV. It says, who, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. Being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father.
You said that this is a hymn?
Yeah, it is likely a hymn. It's not for certain, but this and Colossians 1 being another example is the structure of it, the poetry of it is something that makes scholars think that it's an interpolation of a hymn that Paul, basically in this letter that he's writing to the Philippians, breaks into song. And because it would be something, especially this one, that is such a packaged narrative of Jesus. And so he just basically breaks into song through his letter saying, think like this, because this is what it means to be
Do you think this
God.
was a song that was already circulating at the time, that Paul just knew it, or is something that he's writing?
It seems to be, the consensus seems to be that it was a song that was circulating.
Interesting.
The early Christian communities would have been using this.
Gotcha.
And so Paul knowing it, I don't know whether he wrote it or not is hard to say. But it would be something that he is thinking they know. And so he then just breaks into it and quotes it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, as a musician, that makes me wonder who wrote it, right? Like when you're recording music, the only people who get the credits are the songwriters, right? If you could be the guitarist and lay down the guitar on all the tracks, but you're not going to see anything, as far as like royalties go, unless you wrote the words of the song.
Right.
And obviously that's not at all what's going on here, but it just my brain immediately clicked on. I was like, well, who gets the royalties for this?
Right.
For all the prints of the Bible that have this in there.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm just joking, but yeah, it's interesting.
And it speaks to the formation of the Bible, where the early Christian communities began shortly after Jesus ascended to heaven. I mean, it's like the gospel started going out in ways that ultimately led to people like the Philippians receiving this news of Jesus and then living and forming communities around that. But they didn't yet have much of the New Testament. It wasn't written yet, especially this letter of the Philippians. They didn't have Philippians to go and read until Paul sent it to them.
Right.
But they had things like this hymn that was sufficient for their knowledge of Jesus, plus the Hebrew scriptures, plus maybe some other books of the Bible that were written at that point. But yeah, they had the tradition. They had Jesus's tradition in written form, in oral form, and this is an example where Paul probably is tapping into that in his letter writing.
What do you think about the phrase he uses in verse 10, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord? Is that should like, oh, they ought to do that? Or is that like should like, this is probably going to happen?
Yeah, it's going to happen,
I
think. It's not so much an imperative like you ought to do this, but is that because Jesus has been exalted, given the name above all names, every knee will bow to him.
Interesting. That just poked out to me for the first. I've never really caught that particular should in that passage as like a, hey, you should probably, do that. And I've always read it as a would, like every knee will bow to Jesus. Anyway, just something interesting that stuck out to me. So let's talk about the humility stuff that we were talking about a little bit ago and kind of dive into that. It says that Jesus, who being in very nature, he was God, he did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant and being made in human likeness and, dying on a cross and all that business. So, shoot.
Yeah, it affirms Jesus' divinity, which has been something since the beginning. It is a truth that Jesus is God in the fullness. The Yahweh of the Old Testament is fully revealed in Jesus. He didn't exchange his divinity for something else. He didn't give it up, but he was fully God and then fully man. That has been, since the earliest days of Christianity, something that has been held. And so here, this passage shows how his divinity was expressed in his humanity, that because he was in the very nature of God, not despite the fact or as like a contrast between it, but very much being in the nature of a God means that he used that equality with God, that equal standing with God, not as something for his own advantage, but for ours. And in giving himself up, he made himself nothing, took the form of a servant, was made in human likeness, found in the appearance of man. He humbled himself, being obedient to death, even death on a cross. It is a trajectory downward divesting himself of his power, taking on the form of a anabasis servant, but it's the word for slave, which is the lowest human classification you could have. Slaves then, like our modern American counterparts, worldly counterparts, had no rights. They had no ability to move up. They were captives. And so he comes down taking the form of humanity because he's in the nature of God. He's showing how God's power actually works, going all the way down to a grisly death on the cross. It's like he goes every step of the way down to the bottom of the barrel of humanity. But then on the flip side of this is his exaltation. God exalted him to the highest place, gave him the name that is above every name, and every knee should bow, like we talked about. It's like the V-shaped trajectory, as scholar Matthew Bates puts it, is the story of King Jesus, where being God, he dropped down to our level and then is exalted up at the right hand of God, meaning he is reigning, ruling as the king of the world.
So that seems, I mean, I think kind of obviously counterintuitive that, you know, when you think about even like the ancient ideology of what gods are and how they operate is that they're kind of like these like great, bigger than life, you know, beings, you know, human in form, kind of like interact with humanity in some kind of like avatar type way, but they are like imbued with special powers and they're immortal and all this kind of stuff. And then even like now when we talk about, like I've heard like younger kids talking about how they're like they use the word God like somebody's like really good at something. Like my neighbor kid was talking about Fortnite and he loves Fortnite and he's like, oh yeah, I follow this guy. He's a god at Fortnite. I'm like what? When did that become like a term for the children to talk about other Fortnite players as gods? But it's always like something that is elevated, right? They're above, they're beyond, they're greater than anybody else in the field. And while that is true of Jesus, that he is like the fullest representation of humanity, I feel like it's also that downward trajectory is very counterintuitive to what you think a God would do when it shows up. Right?
Yeah, he's expressing the fullness of deity in his humanity. He is a God of power in his weakness. And so there's a ton of debate in this passage itself as to what it means that he emptied himself, as the ESV renders it. It's kenao is the Greek term. Kenosis might be the theological category that some of you have heard. But it is like, what does it mean that he emptied of himself? And it's really that he did not exploit the power of being God, but made himself into the form of a servant to show the true power of God.
Right.
And which is a way that is contrary what we as humans think is the way to be powerful. Like you don't submit yourself, you definitely don't die, because those just erase your power. And yet that's exactly how he operated. And then the flip side is that he was given everything that, and more so than any human could achieve in their quest for power.
Right.
So he completely subverts that. And that's the whole story of that. That's what it means to be in the nature of God.
Is to not use your power to your own advantage.
Exactly. But to advantage others. And that is the story. God's creation of the world is not so that we would provide for him, as with the ancient Near Eastern gods was like, they create the world usually through some,
violence.
Conquest. Yeah, they're vying for who gets to be on top. And then
I forget which myth it was, but there was like the gods all spit in the blood of a fallen enemy or whatever, and then like humans grew out of like this mixture of spit and blood. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it might be Gilgamesh.
Yeah, something like that.
They're really fun reads just because it's like, you have these gods just like duking it out with each other, and then they're creating humans who are to serve them, kind of like produce stuff for them. And God doesn't do that. He's like, I need nothing from you, is basically the way in which he creates. Is like, we return praise to him. He doesn't need us for the praise. He doesn't need us for the glorification and stuff that comes through that. He's eternally self-sufficient, but he has created as a way to share in that. He has created us and enabled us then to benefit because of that. And so here's Jesus then entering into human history as an act of God doing that, where he's doing it for our advantage by not doing what is rightfully his, and that just is just hoarding his power, and he's he's actually displaying that through human weakness. And then on the flip side of that, he is getting his due praise and glory.
Yeah. So one of the things that this kind of shows me is that Jesus, who being in very nature is God, and then it goes to describe what that nature is, right?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage.
Yeah.
So what I'm putting together is that relinquishing of status, power, seeking your own advantage, that is the nature of God.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is divinity fully expressed.
Hmm.
God's divine nature fully expressed. So it challenges the way we think power operates or
Right.
how we achieve our ends. God achieved his ends, namely Jesus being crowned as the true king, and the praise and knee bowing and glory going to the Father. All of that is like the world knows its maker. But he didn't do that by entering into humanity, becoming a Pharaoh or a Caesar. He came in becoming an itinerant teacher in an obscure part of the world, who then dies at the hands of the powers, and then is still getting all of that.
So God, by nature, according to this passage of the Christian Bible, of course, God by nature is humble. God by nature restrains himself of using his power. God by nature, if I'm hearing this correctly, does not seek his own advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that that's true?
I don't know if I would say he's humble by nature. He humbled himself by becoming human form. But yeah, I can't think of a spot where it would describe him as truly humble in his divine nature in the way we would understand that. But he's displaying humility. He humbles himself.
Yeah.
And that is because who he is, that is what he is led to do.
Interesting. Yeah. Cool. Well, let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about what we should do because of that. All right, and we're back. So, talking about God and in Jesus, showing that he humbles himself, that he does not seek his own advantage, that he uses his power, in fact, to subvert how power seems to work in the world.
Yeah.
Right? So then I think the obvious question is, what do we do about that?
Right. Well, I mean, Paul says as much in verse 5, just have this mindset among you.
Right, exactly.
Think like Jesus, think like this. And so I think it speaks to how we see power and how we use what power we have been given. And fleshing this out and figuring out the practicalities of this is a lifelong pursuit. But the mindset should be whatever we have in terms of our power, our wealth, whatever gives us an advantage is something that we use for the advantage of others, not to hoard for ourselves, not to be self-seeking.
Right.
And so Paul's encouraging the Philippian church to think and act like this, to do this, because it's very much what it means that God became man. And I can't remember which church father it was. I think Athanasius. He said he became like us so we could become like him. And that's what he's doing in this V-shaped trajectory of his humbling to the point of humanity and then being exalted, is like he's swooping down and grabbing us, taking us up with him. We are co-heirs and we reign and rule with him. We are up to what God has created us to be as humans. And so we do that not by using power in the way the world defines it, but by power the way God defines it.
Right. See, that kind of is the swooping down and bringing us up to ruling with him is very counterintuitive to a lot of what I feel like the messaging is around Christianity, you know, just in a lot of different expressions. Obviously, there's like a bunch of different expressions of Christianity, you know, but particularly in the Reformed expression, which is kind of where I came from.
Me too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So there's a lot of like, you know, that we are broken and we are sinners and we need to be saved and we need to be forgiven. We need to be washed clean because we're dirty, like all that stuff, you know? And like, on the one hand, like there is evidence of that in this world, right? There's like disease and there's war and there's like just atrocities that happen, injustices. So that it's clear that, yeah, there's things in this world that need to be fixed and healed. And Jesus seems to have the power to address those things. But the whole like that he's grabbing us to bring us up, you know, out of whatever, you know, that V-shaped trajectory is. Yeah. That's something that I feel like hasn't been clearly communicated a lot, at least not in my experience.
Yeah, it's and there's merit to all of it. When it gets, I think, extracted and then turned into something that's so divorced from the biblical witness, it's like God's so mad at us, but through Jesus, like he can handle us. Like
he can tolerate, you know,
we're so bad. Yeah, like, and so it's like he's our only hope to deflect us from God's wrath, which in part is true, but it misses the part of the equation where it's like Jesus has humbled himself, taken our form to make us more like God. It transform us that way. So he's not leaving us. It's not, the transaction is not done on the belief stage of the Christian faith. It's done in the new creation of which we're working towards. And very much through how we live our lives, we are becoming like God.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a hesitance, at least, you know, in the circles that I have run in the past, to say something like God wants to make us like God, right? Like being, you know, like the Roman says, being conformed to the image of his son, you know, yeah, we can be more Jesus-like, but not like, oh, he's making you like God, you know, like there's something about that seems threatening to like Orthodox Christian doctrine to a way. But like in the beginning, you know, if you go back to the book of Genesis, it says he made humans just like himself in his image, right? Like
we're his representatives, his stand-ins.
So to be brought back to that status seems like the most logical conclusion, right? The most logical thing would be to become like God again, right?
And I wonder, you know, you talk about your neighbor kid who's like, he's a god at Fortnite. And so we think, yeah, it makes you something that's enviable and people look at you and like you are above them. And that's our human conception of what it means to be powerful and be a god. And yet what Jesus displays divinity as, somewhere's like we would actually, in being like God, would be servants. We would be faithful and love, and we would empty ourselves. We would give of ourselves. That's what it means to be godlike. So what he shows is divinity, which is the divine nature that created us. You know, he is the God of the universe. He's like, you're going to be like me because you're in relationship with me.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, that sounds a lot like, you know, the stuff that you'd hear like, you know, in a yoga class where they say like, you know, the light within me acknowledges the light within you. And like a lot of the times Christians are just like, that's just pagan, you know, demon worship and stuff. And like, I'm not claiming to say that it is or isn't, who knows, but like that sounds more consistent with like what I have heard, you know, people acknowledging that that it's not just like, I think what I'm saying is, I think that there is something that's noticeable, that's just like kind of plain to see, that there is that God resides within humans, like the creation force that made this cosmos, this universe, somehow has expressed itself in human beings. And I think the Christian scriptures explore that and describe that in Jesus in clarity, and in the story of Jesus and his kingdom. But I think it's kind of plain to see, that story that God is restoring humans to their rightful place as like, you know, I don't know how to say this other than like God's with him, right? We're not going to become gods. Hear me say that. I'm not. I definitely don't think that. But like, I feel like it's almost that scandalous. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much. Because it can counter ways in which the gospel transaction has been taught. So it sounds maybe heretical to think that we are becoming like God.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the often go-to gospel passages written by Paul, and it's in another letter, 2 Corinthians 5:21, where God made him, meaning Jesus, who had no sin, to be sin for us, so that what? We might become the righteousness of God.
Right.
That often gets formulated as Jesus became sin so he could give us righteousness, which strains the language, is not the picture. It's like he became sin like we are so that we could embody the righteousness of God. We could actually become that. We could be representatives again, reconciled. We could be what we were meant to be the whole time.
So do you think that is, because I've heard that before, do you think that is a spiritual reality or that is a reality? You know what I'm saying? Like, is Paul saying that like in God's eyes, you know, in the spiritual realm or whatever, God does not hold your sins against you anymore because of what Jesus did? Or is he saying like it is possible to be currently right now to live in the same righteousness that Jesus had because of what he's done in you?
It is through Jesus. So yeah, when we get into thoughts like, could we actually be as perfect as he is and stuff, it's like that's not the issue. We are what it is this process of which we, through Jesus, are being crafted into his image. We are becoming more like him. We are becoming to embody very much what the gospel announces, that the kingdom is here, that the true king of the earth is reigning. We then embody the virtues and values of the kingdom. Things like justice and love and peace and patience, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, like all these things that come out of us where if we are actually tethered to Jesus through faith, he is working through us by the power of the Spirit to create in us the display as God's representatives. We are his ambassadors. We are people meant to show the world what God is like. And that is a totality of our lives. It's holistic. It's not just a spiritual reality. It's part that, but it comes out in what we would consider physical terms as well.
What is the Christian responsibility to that then? Because it's one thing, I think, to hear this and to respond in yourself to you know, embody the values of the gospel and, you know, the equity and charity and hospitality and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like it kind of gets a little loosey-goosey the more you try to create that world for other people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm hearing you. More like we're trying to produce that. So how do we produce that?
Well, what I'm saying is like, for example, if I, as a Christian person, am thinking that, you know, that the ethics of the Bible are the best way to do life, and then now I'm trying to legislate those ethics.
Oh, I got you.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, because it's not just good for me, it's good for everybody, which I do believe. I believe that if everybody were to follow the way of Jesus and live in kingdom, like in the kingdom values, that the whole world would be a better place, and the whole world would have more human flourishing, and people would be happier and more fulfilled and more content. I believe that to be true.
Right.
But I also feel like I've seen that go sideways. You know, when Christians or just when people try to impose those ethics through power, going back to what we were talking about, Jesus not asserting his power to control, you know, this reality, but by losing his power is actually creating you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He's creating the reality he's looking for in that he is gaining his place as the king, and he is developing his kingdom through losing power.
Right.
But a lot of times, it can be, I've seen it and I've been guilty of it as myself, that I because I believe that this is actually helpful stuff, I exercise what power and advantages I have
Mm-hmm.
in order to generate that beyond myself.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'd probably in its worst form is saying like this is something that other people need, not myself.
Right,
You know,
of
that's
course.
like, and so I think and this is the way Jesus operated. I mean, he came into human form, did not assume a powerful position in the world. He did not go to the people in power and say, okay, hey, through you, we're going to affect the masses.
Mm.
He went to the masses on the grassroots level and impacted, the various sinners and tax collectors and the lame and the blind and the individuals who needed the redemptive work, the transformative work. He went to them, transformed them, and it was spreading out from there. And so I think for us, it's like it begins with us as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
It begins with us as individuals in a church community. That is why we gather together. That is why as a unit, the church is written to in the New Testament as if we are a singular body. We are people together that are on this pursuit. And so it begins with us and then moves outward.
Mm.
And what we are doing in that is showing God's power through his character, his virtues, his values. And that becomes something that the world sees and is attracted to or maybe repelled by, but they're affected by for sure.
Mm.
And that leads to change. And this is throughout Christian history. It has not been done perfectly, but you have seen significant change come through people who have been embracing this gospel, have been transformed into the image of Jesus, doing things in the world that then have launched more large scale or global changes.
Right.
Like but it really begins with us going outward versus outward and then affecting us inward.
So yeah, because that's what I was thinking of is like, when we were starting the podcast, this episode, talking about how the Bible like contains the kind of like keys to human flourishing in this world. And like me as a human, and I want to see my fellow human beings flourishing. I want this for them, right? But I think it's easy to lose yourself in feeling like you have what other people need. Kind of like what you were saying, like this is more for you than it is for me. Obviously, I mean, I don't really feel that way, but I wonder if I do. I wonder how many of us actually do. How many of us think that because, like it's kind of like that onward Christian soldier stuff. Like we have the answer, and so we need to go and like make a way for God to like affect our country or our world or whatever it is, and like and we're the
Right.
we're the ambassadors and we're the soldiers and we gotta like create this thing and we gotta build the kingdom and all this kind of stuff. And while, like I said, like I believe that this is goodness, like God's words are filled with life and provide life for everybody who will listen. Whoever has ears to hear. But I do feel like it kind of gets wrapped up in there's something that gets lost when those things when you're trying to affect culture on such a large level to kind of like create I'm having a hard time articulating it, but like I think there's a difference between as an individual or as small communities generating cultures around you, and the difference between that and then going through the chain of power to try to institute culture downward.
Yeah. If the power of God truly is displayed in weakness, then it is not our strength that is going to get the job done. It is not our station in life that's going to get the job done. It is our display of what God has created us to be as his image bearers. And collectively doing that, there is power in that. God works through that. But Jesus is the example. He's the representative human who did not go to the highest levels of authority to then from the top down change systems and cultures, but he worked through people, and in so doing, we as people can actually have an effect on systems and cultures but it can't be at the expense of us embodying what he is and who he is. That becomes the primary way in which we are doing that. God's mission is through those that are becoming like him, not just those that are on his team trying to then win victories for him. It is very much through us as a collective unit, as a church, becoming the gospel, as Michael Gorman puts it.
Right. So what then do we do? Like, my question is, I guess, what do we engage with? How far do we go? Right? Because there's things happening that, this is 2020. If you're watching this from the future, there's been massive upheaval when it comes to, the Black Lives Matter movement and the, government and the presidential, election that's going on right now. It's just like, there is just like chaos everywhere. And I feel like there is all this commotion happening around these things, but an eerie silence from the church, an eerie silence from Christians. And not so much around the political part. There seems to be a lot of dialogue in the church around, the presidential campaign and that kind of stuff. But there's just like also a lot of issues that I just hear kind of people saying like, well, just preach the gospel and then, the rest will work itself out and don't focus on the issues and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, I feel like Jesus would, advocate for things, right? It's not like he just never said anything controversial. Like he did quite frequently. And so like, I don't know which things, sometimes I'm saying, I don't know which things is my responsibility as a Christian to advocate for, because that is what Jesus would have advocated for, and what things I should just kind of leave to Jesus and just continue to, exalt him through my life, and how far to go, because if we're trying to impose the ethics of the kingdom of God, through power, that doesn't seem to be consistent with Jesus's model. But also, if there's systemic issues going on that need to be addressed from a systemic level, like you can't just do that by hanging out with your community group on Wednesday night. Like there's some balance, some line that needs to be towed.
Yeah, this I believe it was Nelson Craybill who said something to the effect of Jesus sowed the seeds for prophetic witness of in terms of challenging power, challenging the system. Where it is not lost on us that Jesus didn't speak against Roman power. He didn't speak against taxation. He didn't speak against any sort of like church-state relationship. He just like that just was not in his immediate purview. He cared more about transforming human hearts and his covenant community. But through that, he creates into people a mission that will not tolerate things like that in the world to participate in them. And so the book of Revelation is a great example where here you have John the Revelator critiquing Rome and critiquing the ways in which Rome had exploited people, had been corrupt financially, had been idolatrous, and John's like, have no part in that. Don't participate in any of those corrupt systems. Don't be people that feed that align with the beast, which is the representation of Rome. I mean, he is using cartoonish imagery to depict the Roman Empire as like, don't participate in that stuff. Revelation 17 and 18 depicts Rome coming down he is using the imagery of a prostitute, likely referring to the goddess Roma, who would be kind of like our Statue of Liberty, something like if you use it in modern terms, think the Statue of Liberty drinking the blood of dead Christians who she is just whoring around. He's like, that's Rome, and she's going down, and those who have profited from her, the kings that have gotten rich from her, those that have been trading through her and been sharers in her power are going to watch as she goes down, all that they have going down with her. And so he's like, come out of her. That's the phrase he uses in 18:4, I believe, is don't participate in that kind of system. And so this is a text, Revelation, written towards the end of the first century. Christians were not powerful. They were not necessarily whole-scale persecuted, but there was persecution happening.
The Philippians text you're talking about?
No, Revelation.
The Revelation
Yeah,
text. Okay.
Revelation, which speaks more to systems and larger society. And so it's Christians shaped by the Philippians text, living in a larger context that is corrupt, that is not how God has designed the world to function. And so John, the Revelator's call is don't participate in the evil and seek what is good. And so when we have a level of cultural power like we do in America in terms of sheer numbers of Christians, we have the ability to influence things in ways that the early Christians just had no prayer of. Slavery was a good example then. I mean, there is no text in the New Testament that is speaking against the institution of slavery. There are even Roman parallels. No one in the Roman world was calling for the abolition of slavery. It just was not in their scope. Right. But you see in the New Testament, Paul talking to Philemon about his runaway slaves, like treat him as a brother, not as a slave. Like it's like he's subverting the whole system through that. And think the sum total of Christians embodying something like that, where it's like we won't participate in what is evil. And if there's millions of us, then there can be an effective change in the larger systems.
See.
And we in America have the ability to vote and do things like that directly that the biblical writers, like, they couldn't have conceived of a democratic republic like we have today.
Right.
You know, we kind of wish they did. We're like, we wish that same governmental form was there, because then they would tell us how to exercise our votes and stuff. And maybe Paul would be a little more pragmatic and John would be like, I have nothing to do with it. Just like, we don't know. They would have different voices. Sure. They would have approached it differently. But we now as modern Americans have to put all this in practice. And it really begins with how are we conducting ourselves? Mm-hmm. And what truly are we valuing? Some of the political issues are things that rightly God does not like. Like he just would be against it. But are we focusing on those at the expense of other things that he also cares about? Mm-hmm. And if we are wholly formed by the gospel, we're going to be politically homeless. We're going to look at both parties in our two-party system and say, there's elements of good in both of these. There's elements of corruption in both of these. And it doesn't necessarily mean we can't vote for either one of them, but we can't fully align with them and say that is God's party because that represents everything that God is. It keeps us as Christians kind of grounded, saying we are going to use our influence and what power we have been given for the advantage of others, but recognizing that human power is corrupted, and we are relying on God to recreate the cosmos in a way that has the true flourishing, the true shalom, the true reign and rule of a monarch. In the perfect form of government is Jesus as king, exalted, every knee bowing to him. It's a monarchy, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, man. You know, just like really counterintuitive.
Yes.
Really counterintuitive to what, to how the world seems to work. And even, as somebody who, like, let me put it this way. I get it. I get it when people want to institute change on a massive scale. It seems like, the shortest distance from point A to point B is like systemic change, right? Mm-hmm. Like we see social injustice happening, and like, let's say, you're seeing like some of the systemic issues of like, the public school system and like redlining. I don't know if you've ever looked into redlining before, but that's like, this is bonkers how much that has affected our communities. And like, you want to see systemic change. And so you're like pushing for legislature around that. And I see that. I'm like, that's super important. And then I see like, some of the God's kingdom ethics and people wanting to push those into like the positions of power so that we can institute it. And that seems like the shortest distance from point A, which is something we don't want, to point B, which is something we do want. Mm-hmm. But that does not seem to be consistent with Jesus's model. However, it also doesn't seem to be like there was a really good example in the Bible of people who have that capacity. Like you said, they had no dream to affect their government in any way, no dream to affect their culture. All they could really do was affect their immediate communities. It's all they had access to.
Right.
But now we live in a different world where we have access to being able to, even social media itself is like its own, power system,
Yeah.
if you can get enough people like retweeting or, sharing on Facebook some article or some thing, like you can create truth out of thin air,
Right.
easily do that. And I feel like there's so much more going on in how power works that it's hard to know how to engage with those things in a way that that promotes human flourishing and furthers what God is trying to do in this world through equity and charity and that kind of stuff. So I mean, like, I see it. I see why people would do that and why that seems like the most logical explanation. But I also see Jesus, like continually reducing his power in order to accomplish that. So I think the big question is, in what circumstances do we do which thing, and how do we know when to do those things?
Yeah, and if only there was a script.
Right.
If only there was a blueprint for it. But I think the way in which God works is through us consistently tethered to Jesus and empowered by the Spirit, whereas like we can't ever come to a certain knowledge and then just go on and live our lives because we've got it. It's like we need to be continually connected to him, because away from him we will not represent him. And so yet through him, as we are connected to him, we're going to see the world the way he wants us to see, and we will be led that way.
Mm-hmm.
And we will have things like conviction, or we will have inspiration. We will have we will be prompted in certain ways that we just can't from right now say this is exactly step A, B, C on how to do that. We rely on him to lead us, guide us, but he's going to lead us and guide us in the ways that he wants to, not in the ways we want to. And sometimes that may lead us, like Paul in Philippians, to be in a jail, talking about, he is writing this letter while he is incarcerated, like literally has no power.
Yeah.
And he's talking about the power of God.
Right.
And this letter has been read countless times over the last 2,000 years. And it's like, do you think Paul at the time thought, as this letter was being created, I'm going to be influencing people in a place called America
right.
in 2020.
Right.
Right. It just that's not what he was thinking. He had just been living a life that was where he had divested his power. He had been a very powerful Jewish figure. He had been a rising star in Judaism. He had the credentials to be a powerful teacher. And he, because of his encounter with Jesus, lived a life. I mean, it dropped him in economic class. It did things to him that just like subverted what you would think an influential person then would do. But Paul is arguably the most influential person aside from Jesus in human history, just in terms of what he shaped in societies, let alone people actually encountering God through him, but just like through Paul's writings and the advent of Christianity and how Western civilization has been shaped. Paul did that, and he was arguably a very powerless person in how he lived his life during his ministry.
So what I'm hearing then is like there's some balance between just living faithfully to Jesus, not knowing what that will produce, and also speaking like clearly to or against or whatever the things that seem to oppose human flourishing and the ethics of the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm glad we figured that one out.
Right. and it is probably related to giftings. I mean, there are certain people that are going to have prophetic voices. There are going to be certain people with leadership gifts that are able to mobilize people. It's not a call that each of us have. We're not all called as Christians to challenge the status quo in society.
Right.
We're called to embody what God has deemed his virtues. We are called to become people that represent him. And in so doing, some will challenge larger systems and have effective change. You think the William Wilberforces, and those of the world that are prompted by Jesus and then have political power and use that in ways that advantage others. But the point is that we as individuals shouldn't be thinking, how do I gain more human power? Because that's the way then God will be able to effectively work. That's not his that's not his method.
It's just but I feel like that's what's happening. Like no matter who you talk to on what side, like the goal is to gain more power than the other person so that you can affect your change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is human nature. This is why it's so radical to think not just that there was a human, Jesus, who taught this way, but that he is God himself who taught this way.
Right. It reminds me. It reminds me of Jesus's. He says to give to any who would beg from you, and to lend to any who would borrow from you, and I forget where else it says that to not. If you lend to somebody, to not expect repayment. I'm like, this is terrible financial advice, Jesus.
Right.
Like, do you know how it works to like buy a house? Like, you have to have interest, but like, and I feel like this is the same thing as Jesus is going, oh, you want to affect change in the world? Well, don't try to affect change in the world. That's like what you should not be doing. And you're like, Jesus, this is terrible advice. Don't you have any idea how this thing works? But then here he is, King of the universe, sitting on the throne, has affected more change in this world than any single human who's ever lived.
Right.
So crazy.
And maybe,
stuff.
If, like Paul encourages us, we think this way, the world could be a different place. We could be different people. The world could be a different place if we had this mind.
It's kind of like faith. You have to trust it. You have to trust that even though this doesn't seem likely, this is the way.
Yeah. Wow. That's what it means to be a student. It's like, I don't see how this is actually working, but I will trust you because you know something I don't. And that's our posture.
That's good. Well, Brandon, thank you
Thanks
for
for
coming
having
on the
me.
show. We're excited to do more of these. We're going to be doing more of the Bible episodes where we just kind of exposit certain sections of Scripture and see what it says to us right now and how we should be living in this world and engaging with the world around us. So stay tuned. We're going to try to put out an episode every single week. We'll have next time on the show, I think we're going to be doing a conversation about a book, The Blue Parakeet. I'm not sure if that's the next episode or the episode after that, but it'll be coming up soon. So if you're listening and you want to join in on the conversation on The Blue Parakeet, go buy it. It's by Scott McKnight, who's actually Brandon's professor at Northern Seminary.
Northern Seminary.
Fantastic author, brilliant theologian. Go pick it up, and then we'll be discussing that book in a couple episodes at least, if not the next episode. But thanks for joining us today, listening to the Kindred Sessions, and see you next time.